You chose the Army over us. The text message glowed on my phone screen in the suffocating heat of our forward operating base tent in Al Anbar province. My name is Staff Sergeant Logan Pierce. I'm 44 years old, and I've been serving as a combat engineer with the U.S. Army for the past 20 years. This was my 4th deployment to Iraq, and I was 3 months into what would be a 12-month rotation building infrastructure and clearing IEDs from supply routes that kept American and Iraqi forces alive. I stared at that message for a long time, dust particles dancing in the shaft of desert sunlight that cut through our makeshift communications area. The generator hummed in the background, and somewhere outside I could hear the familiar sound of Humvees rolling through the checkpoint. Melanie had sent that text at 2:47 a.m. her time, which meant she'd been up late thinking about this, probably working herself into one of those emotional states where she convinced herself she was the victim in our marriage. We'd been married for 12 years. Met her when I was stationed at Fort Bragg back in 2012, fresh off my 2nd deployment to Afghanistan. She was working part-time at a dental office in Fayetteville, North Carolina. 26 years old with auburn hair and a smile that could light up a room when she wanted it to. Back then, she used to tell people she was proud to be married to a soldier. Used to say she understood the sacrifice, that she was part of something bigger than herself. Things changed somewhere along the way. Maybe it was the 3rd deployment, or maybe it was just the slow erosion that happens when someone starts measuring their happiness against what they think they're missing, instead of what they have. By the time I left for Iraq this time, Melanie had developed this habit of making comments about other husbands who worked regular jobs, who came home every night, who took their wives on weekend trips to the mountains. I typed back a simple response. I'm serving our country. We'll talk when I get back. Then I put the phone down and went back to reviewing the next day's patrol routes. That's what you do in the Army. You focus on the mission. You don't let personal drama interfere with keeping your people alive. What I didn't know at the time was that Melanie had already made her decision about our marriage. She'd been talking to a contractor named Derek Holbrook who worked construction jobs around Fort Liberty. Met him at some bar in town, where she'd started going with her co-workers after her shifts at the dental office. Derek was everything I wasn't in her mind. Available, attentive, and most importantly, physically present to give her the attention she felt she deserved. The 2nd message came a week later while I was in the middle of a briefing about a suspected IED cache we'd been tasked to investigate. I deserve better than waiting around for someone who's never here. This time, I didn't respond at all. I finished the briefing, led my team out to clear the cache site, and didn't think about Melanie again until we were back on base that evening, covered in dust, and grateful to be alive after finding and disabling 3 roadside bombs that could have killed a convoy of Marines. But she wasn't done. The calls started coming every few days, always when she knew I'd be trying to rest or catch up on paperwork. She'd launch into these long speeches about how lonely she was, how she felt like she was married to a ghost, how other wives got to have normal lives with their husbands. I listened for the first few calls, tried to be understanding, tried to explain that this deployment was different because we were doing critical work in a dangerous area, that the money I was sending home was setting us up for a better future when I got out. The money isn't the point, Logan, she said during one particularly heated conversation. I need a partner, not a paycheck. That should have been my first real warning sign. But I was focused on the mission and honestly believed that if I could just get through this deployment, we could work things out when I got home. What I didn't realize was that while I was focused on the mission, Melanie was focused on spending the money I was sending home. My combat pay plus the family separation allowance meant she was getting about $800 a month deposited directly into our joint checking account. For someone who'd never managed that much money before, it must have felt like winning the lottery. The first major purchase she made without consulting me was selling my 1967 Camaro SS. I'd been restoring that car for 5 years, had about $12,000 invested in parts and labor. It wasn't just a car to me. It was my hobby, my stress relief, my connection to my father who'd taught me to work on engines when I was a kid. She sold it for $8,000 to some kid who probably had no idea what he was getting, then used the money for a down payment on a brand new Jeep Wrangler. I found out about it in an email, not even a phone call. Just a casual mention in a message about how she needed reliable transportation and the Camaro was just sitting in the garage anyway. When I called her that night, she was defensive and dismissive. "You're not here to drive it," she said. I needed something that wouldn't break down, and Derek helped me find a good deal on the Jeep. Derek. The first time she mentioned his name, just like that, as if it was perfectly normal for another man to be helping my wife make major financial decisions while I was deployed in a combat zone. I kept my voice level, asked who Derek was, and she explained he was just a friend who knew about cars. Just a friend who happened to be spending enough time with my wife to help her sell my car and buy a new one. I should have seen the pattern forming, but I was dealing with my own stress. Our area of operations had become increasingly dangerous, and I was responsible for a 12-man squad of engineers who looked to me to make the right decisions under pressure. We were working 14-hour days, clearing routes, building defensive positions, and trying to stay alive in a place where every pile of debris could be hiding an explosive device designed to kill Americans. The second major purchase came 2 months later. Melanie had found a house she wanted to buy, a 4-bedroom colonial in a newer subdivision about 20 minutes from Fort Liberty. She sent me pictures and floor plans, talked about how it would be perfect for starting a family, how the schools were better, how she deserved to live somewhere nice after all the sacrifices she'd made as a military wife. The house cost $285,000, which was more than we'd ever discussed spending. But she'd already talked to a realtor and had Derek help her look at the property. She wanted to put an offer in immediately because there were other interested buyers. The realtor had told her that with my VA loan eligibility and her income from the dental office, they could probably get approved for the mortgage. Here's where my military training actually served me well, even though I didn't fully understand it at the time. I told Melanie that any major purchase like a house needed to wait until I got back, that we needed to go through the paperwork together, that buying a house was too important a decision to make over email and phone calls from a combat zone. She was frustrated, accused me of not trusting her judgment, but I held firm. What I did instead was call my old friend, Chief Warrant Officer Tom Briggs, who worked in the JAG office at Fort Liberty. Tom and I had served together in Afghanistan, and he'd transitioned into legal work after taking some shrapnel in his leg during our second deployment. I explained the situation, wife wanting to buy a house while I was deployed, making major financial decisions without proper consultation, mentioning this Derek guy more and more frequently. Tom listened without judgment and gave me some advice that probably saved my financial future. "Logan," he said, "you need to understand that legally, she can't obligate you to a mortgage without your signature, but she can drain your joint accounts, max out credit cards, and make financial decisions that could impact your credit and your ability to get that VA loan later. If you're worried about her decision-making while you're deployed, we can set up some protective measures under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. The SCRA is a federal law designed to protect active duty military members from financial predators and legal issues while they're deployed and unable to handle their affairs personally." Tom explained that we could set up a power of attorney arrangement that would require dual signatures on major financial decisions, and we could also establish a separate account for my combat pay that would be protected from joint account access. I thought about it for a week, watching Melanie's behavior in our phone calls and emails. She was becoming increasingly secretive about her daily activities, more defensive when I asked about her plans, and she kept mentioning Derek in contexts that suggested he was spending a lot of time at our house. When she mentioned that Derek had helped her move some furniture around and that he'd offered to help with yard work while I was gone, I made my decision. I called Tom back and asked him to set up the protective measures. We established a trust account that would receive my combat pay and separation allowance, leaving only my base pay going into the joint account. This meant Melanie would still have access to about $3,200 a month for household expenses, but the extra $3,600 in combat pay would be protected in an account she couldn't access. The legal paperwork took about 2 weeks to process, and during that time, Melanie made her biggest mistake. She bought the house anyway. I found out through a Facebook post she'd made, showing off pictures of her new kitchen and talking about how excited she was to be in her dream home. She'd somehow managed to get approved for the mortgage using my VA loan eligibility. probably by forging my signature on the application documents. Derek was in several of the photos, helping her unpack boxes, standing in the kitchen with his arm around her waist like they were a couple celebrating their new home together. When I called her that night, she was unapologetic. "I found a way to make it work," she said. "Derek knows people in the mortgage business, and they were able to expedite the approval process. I thought you'd be happy that I took care of everything without bothering you while you're dealing with more important things." The casual way she mentioned Derek's involvement in fraudulently obtaining a VA loan using my eligibility made my blood run cold. Not because I was angry. Anger is a luxury you can't afford in a combat zone. But because I realized I was married to someone who had fundamentally changed into a person I didn't recognize. Someone who would commit loan fraud and then justify it as doing me a favor. I told her we'd discuss it when I got back and ended the call. Then I called Tom Briggs and explained what had happened. Tom was quiet for a long moment before he spoke. "Logan, what she's describing sounds like loan fraud. If she forged your signature on VA loan documents, that's a federal crime. And if this Derek character was involved in facilitating fraudulent loan documents, he could be looking at serious prison time." Tom arranged for a military legal investigator to look into the loan application, and within 72 hours, we had confirmation that Melanie had indeed forged my signature on multiple documents and had listed Derek Holbrook as a co-signer on some of the paperwork, despite the fact that VA loans are specifically for eligible veterans and their spouses. Here's what Melanie didn't understand about military legal processes. When you're dealing with federal crimes involving active duty personnel, the investigation moves fast and the consequences are severe. The military takes care of its own, and that includes protecting deployed service members from financial crimes committed by their family members. While the legal investigation was proceeding, I made a decision that probably saved me from financial ruin. I stopped all fund transfers to the joint account and redirected everything through the trust account Tom had set up. This meant that after the first of the next month, Melanie would have no access to any of my military pay. I didn't tell her about this change immediately. I wanted to see how she would handle the situation when the money stopped flowing. I wanted to understand whether she was capable of taking responsibility for her actions, or whether she would continue down the path she'd chosen. The answer came within a week. When the expected deposit didn't appear in the joint account, Melanie called me in a panic. "Something's wrong with your pay," she said. "The money didn't come through this month. You need to call finance and get it straightened out." I told her calmly that there was no problem with my pay, that I'd made some adjustments to ensure our finances were properly managed while I was deployed. She demanded to know what adjustments, and I explained that I'd moved my combat pay and separation allowance into a protected account to prevent any further unauthorized expenditures. The conversation that followed revealed everything I needed to know about who Melanie had become. She screamed at me over the satellite phone about how she had bills to pay, how the house payment was due, how she'd made commitments based on the income I'd been providing. When I pointed out that she'd made those commitments without consulting me and using fraudulent documentation, she claimed that Derek had told her it was legal because we were married and I was deployed. "Derek this, Derek that," I said finally. "Melanie, who exactly is Derek to you?" The silence that followed was answer enough. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed from panicked to defiant. "Derek is someone who's here for me when I need support. Someone who doesn't make me feel like I'm married to a ghost. Someone who understands what I need." I absorbed that information without reacting emotionally. In the Army, you learn to process critical intelligence and make decisions based on facts, not feelings. The facts were clear. My wife was having an affair with a man who had helped her commit loan fraud. She felt entitled to spend my combat pay to support this relationship, and she saw herself as the victim in the situation. "I understand," I said. "We'll sort everything out when I get back." What Melanie interpreted as acceptance was actually me switching into mission planning mode. I had 7 months left on my deployment, and I was going to use that time to systematically address the situation she'd created. Tom Briggs became my point man for the legal strategy. The loan fraud investigation had uncovered a pattern of financial irregularities that extended beyond just the house purchase. Melanie had been using my military allotment to fund a lifestyle that included Derek as a de facto husband. spending money on restaurants, weekend trips, and purchases that clearly benefited someone other than the legally married couple. More importantly, the house purchase itself was legally void because the VA loan had been obtained through fraudulent means. The bank would eventually discover the irregularities and demand immediate repayment of the full loan amount, which Melanie obviously couldn't provide on her dental assistant's salary. Tom explained the timeline. The bank investigation usually takes 3 to 6 months once they're notified of potential fraud. The VA will want to recover their guarantee on the loan, and they'll move quickly once the paperwork is reviewed. Your wife and this Derek character are looking at potential criminal charges, and the house will go into foreclosure once the loan is declared invalid. While this legal process was unfolding, I focused on my mission in Iraq. We were making good progress on infrastructure development, and my squad had successfully cleared dozens of IED sites without losing anyone. The work was dangerous and demanding, but it was also purposeful in a way that gave me clarity about what really mattered. I thought about my father during those long desert nights. He'd served 2 tours in Vietnam as a Marine and had come home to find that his girlfriend had cleaned out their joint bank account and moved in with another man while he was fighting in the jungle. Dad had rebuilt his life from nothing, met my mother a few years later, and created a stable family that gave me the foundation I needed to become the man I was. Son, he told me once when I was dealing with a difficult breakup in high school, you can't control what other people do. You can only control how you respond to what they do. The measure of a man isn't whether he gets knocked down, it's whether he gets back up with his dignity intact. I decided to get back up with my dignity intact. The first step was ensuring that I couldn't be held financially responsible for Melanie's continued poor decisions. Tom helped me establish a formal separation agreement that would be filed with the court once I returned from deployment. This document clearly outlined the division of assets and debts, with particular attention to the fraudulent house purchase and associated liabilities. The second step was protecting my military career and security clearance. Financial problems can impact a soldier's clearance status, and I needed to document that I had acted responsibly to address the situation as soon as I became aware of it. Tom provided a paper trail showing that I had reported the fraud, cooperated with the investigation, and taken appropriate legal steps to protect government interests. The third step was the hardest, accepting that my marriage was over and planning for a different future than the one I'd envisioned. For 12 years, I'd built my identity around being a husband and soldier. I'd made decisions based on what was best for our partnership, sacrificed opportunities for advancement that would have required additional deployments, and saved money with the goal of eventually buying a house where we could settle down when I retired from the Army. Now I was 44 years old, deployed in a combat zone, dealing with the collapse of my marriage and the realization that the woman I'd trusted with my financial future had betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way possible. But I wasn't broken. The Army had taught me that you adapt to changing conditions, you execute your mission with available resources, and you take care of your people. My people now included just me, and my mission was to complete my deployment successfully and return home to rebuild my life on solid ground. The updates from Tom came regularly over the next several months. The bank had indeed discovered the loan fraud and had initiated foreclosure proceedings on the house. Melanie had tried to make payments using credit cards that she'd opened in my name, but the credit card companies had been notified of the identity theft and had frozen the accounts. Derek, it turned out, was not the successful contractor Melanie had believed him to be. He was a day laborer who worked sporadically and had his own financial problems. When the easy money from my military pay stopped flowing and the legal heat started building around the loan fraud, Derek disappeared from the picture entirely. Melanie's attempts to contact me became increasingly desperate. She wanted me to call off the legal investigation, wanted me to somehow fix the house situation, wanted me to continue sending money so she could make the mortgage payments until we could work things out. I responded to one of her emails with a simple message. The legal process will run its course. We'll discuss our future when I return. What I didn't tell her was that I'd already decided our future. I'd consulted with a civilian divorce attorney who specialized in military cases, and we'd prepared divorce papers that would be filed immediately upon my return. The grounds were adultery and financial misconduct. both of which were well documented through the fraud investigation and her own admissions about Derek. The house went into foreclosure in month 8 of my deployment. Melanie had to move out and find an apartment she could afford on her dental assistant's salary. Derek was long gone by then, and she was facing potential criminal charges for loan fraud and identity theft. She called me one last time before the foreclosure was finalized. She was crying, apologetic, claiming that Derek had manipulated her into making bad decisions, begging me to help her save the house. "Logan, I know I made mistakes," she said through her tears, "but we can fix this. We can start over when you get home. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I listened to her entire speech without interrupting. When she finished, I was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun set over the Iraqi desert from my position on the base perimeter, where I'd taken the call. "Melanie," I said finally, "you chose Derek over us. You chose fraud over honesty. You chose to spend my combat pay on another man while I was risking my life to provide for our future. Those weren't mistakes. Those were choices. And choices have consequences. But I love you," she said. "I know I screwed up, but I love you." "If you'd loved me," I replied, "you would have waited. If you'd loved me, you would have respected the money I was earning in a combat zone. If you'd loved me, you wouldn't have committed crimes using my name and military benefits." She started crying harder, but I wasn't moved by her tears anymore. I'd seen too much real suffering in Iraq to be manipulated by someone who was crying because she was facing the consequences of her own choices. "The divorce papers will be filed when I get back," I told her. "Tom Briggs can explain the details to you. As for the criminal charges, that's between you and the federal prosecutors. I didn't create this situation, Melanie. You did." I ended the call and turned off my phone. I had 4 months left in Iraq, and I wanted to focus on finishing the mission successfully. Those final months were actually some of the most productive of my deployment. Without the emotional drain of dealing with Melanie's crisis, I was able to concentrate fully on my job. My squad completed every assigned mission, and we pioneered some new techniques for detecting buried explosives that were later adopted throughout the theater of operations. I also used the time to plan my post-deployment transition. I decided to stay in the Army and pursue advancement opportunities that I'd previously declined because of family considerations. I applied for Sergeant First Class and for specialized training that would prepare me for leadership roles in future operations. When I finally rotated back to Fort Liberty, I was a different man than the one who'd left a year earlier. Physically, I was in the best shape of my life. Mentally, I was focused and clear about my priorities. Emotionally, I was ready to start the next chapter of my life without the baggage of a failed marriage. Tom Briggs met me at the airport with the divorce papers and an update on the legal situation. Melanie had pled guilty to loan fraud in exchange for probation and restitution payments. Derek had been arrested and was facing federal charges. The house had been sold by the bank, and all parties involved in the fraudulent loan had been barred from future VA loan eligibility. "She wants to see you," Tom told me as we drove back to base. "She's been calling the office every week asking when you were coming back." "Not interested," I said. "The papers say everything that needs to be said." The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Melanie received nothing from the settlement because the court determined that her fraudulent actions had forfeited any claim to marital assets. I kept my truck, my remaining personal belongings, and my military benefits. She kept the debt from her credit card spending and the legal fees from her criminal case. I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved back in with her parents and was working full-time at the dental office to pay off her restitution obligations. Derek had been sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for his role in the loan fraud scheme. As for me, I was promoted to Sergeant First Class 6 months after returning from deployment. I used my VA loan eligibility to buy a small house near the base. Nothing fancy, but solid and mine. I started dating a teacher named Amelia who understood military life and respected the demands of my career. 2 years later, I was selected for the Advanced Non-Commissioned Officer course, which led to my promotion to Master Sergeant and a new assignment training combat engineers at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. It was exactly the kind of career opportunity I'd always wanted but had never pursued because Melanie had wanted to stay near her family in North Carolina. Sometimes I run into people who knew Melanie and me as a couple, and they ask what happened to our marriage. I tell them that we grew in different directions, that military life isn't for everyone, that some people aren't built for the sacrifices that come with serving your country. I don't talk about the betrayal, the fraud, or the way she chose another man over her deployed husband. Not because I'm protecting her, but because those details don't define who I am or who I've become. What defines me is how I responded when my world fell apart in an Iraqi desert. I kept my focus on the mission. I protected my fellow soldiers. I used the legal system appropriately to address criminal behavior. I maintained my dignity and my values, even when someone I trusted had abandoned theirs. The money Melanie spent on Derek and that house, it was just money. The time I spent deployed while she was building a life with another man, it was time spent serving my country and keeping my fellow Americans safe. The real loss wasn't financial or even personal. The real loss was discovering that someone I'd chosen as a life partner didn't have the character I'd believed she possessed. But that loss led to a gain, the knowledge that I could handle betrayal, rebuild from nothing, and create a better life based on clearer priorities. I'm 46 now, happily remarried to Amelia, and preparing for my final deployment before I retire from the Army. We've built a strong relationship based on honest communication, shared values, and mutual respect for each other's independence and strength. Sometimes Amelia asks me if I regret the 12 years I spent with Melanie, and I tell her no. Those years taught me what I needed in a partner, what I wouldn't accept in a relationship, and how to recognize the difference between someone who supports your mission and someone who undermines it. Melanie thought I chose the Army over our marriage. What she never understood was that I chose duty, honor, and service over convenience, comfort, and immediate gratification. Those weren't choices between the Army and her. Those were choices about what kind of man I wanted to be. She made her choices too. She chose Derek over me, fraud over honesty, immediate pleasure over long-term commitment. And in the end, those choices led her exactly where they were always going to lead her. Alone, financially ruined, and facing the consequences of betraying someone who had never betrayed her. I don't feel sorry for her anymore. I don't feel angry either. What I feel is grateful that her betrayal happened early enough in my life for me to recover completely, and thankful that I learned the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you can provide for them. The Army taught me that you can't control the battlefield, but you can control your response to contact with the enemy. Melanie's betrayal was contact with an enemy I hadn't recognized. But once I understood the situation clearly, I responded with the same discipline and strategic thinking that had kept me alive in combat. I completed the mission, brought my people home safely, and built a better life on the foundation of hard-earned wisdom. Sometimes the best revenge is simply proving that you're stronger than someone believed you to be. Not stronger than them, stronger than they thought you were when they decided you were someone they could break.